Today we have Manisha Thakor, a nationally renowned financial literacy advocate for women and founder of MoneyZen, a boutique financial well-being consultancy. She's a 25-year veteran of the financial services industry, and her work has been featured in a wide range of media outlets, including the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and CNN, among others. Manisha sits on the board of the National Endowment for Financial Education, and she's authored 2 personal finance books, On My Own 2 Feet and Get Financially Naked. Manisha earned her MBA from Harvard Business School and her Bachelor of Arts from Wellesley College. Manisha, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh my gosh, it's such a pleasure to be here with you too.
We are so excited to talk retirement planning with you. But before we kick it off, we do like to ask our guests our standard intro question, which lets our listeners get to learn a little bit more about you personally. And that question is, tell us about your money story.
So my money story, I'm 51 years old, to put this into perspective. And I feel like it began at age 11 when in a very unique father-daughter bonding moment, my dad, who's an accountant and by that time was a chief financial officer of a company, sat me down with his HP 12C calculator and taught me how to calculate out if I saved my babysitting and lawn mowing money, and it grew at 5% real, 6% real, 7% real rates of return until I was 65, what those amounts would result in. And when I saw the numbers, I was like, whoa. And that's how I really got interested in personal finance. And I'm a mixed race. I'm half Indian. And I really lucked out. I have a younger brother who also works in finance. He's a portfolio manager on the institutional side. And my dad always talked to us the same about money. I can remember coming home and watching a show that's no longer on air, but it was a PBS show called McNear Report. And we used to sit down and it was like a thing for us when my dad got home from work to watch the business news. And my mom, she's like an original hippie. And so she read books to me like Free to Be You and Me, and always taught me that money gives women voices and choices. So I had a really positive money story from the standpoint of a really unique, non-traditional introduction to the power of investing.
Well, lucky you. I think that has to do with usually dads who are CPAs. I mean, that's like a really good start to anyone's money story, right?
That's the second time we've had a guest on the show, Katie, where the dad was a CPA. Sorry, it's the third time, I think, where the dad was either a CPA or some sort of, financial planner type person. And they had that talk with, it's such a formative talk. Everybody remembers their talk about the birds and the bees, right? But this is so much more important.
It is.
About dads being CPAs being like, instead of that, we're going to go to the calculator.
We're going to go straight to the numbers.
And Manisha, we're just grateful because of your good money story, we benefit from all of your knowledge and all of your books. So we're huge fans and we're so excited for today's talk. So we've had a ton of guests come on and share, retirement is the best place to start investing. That's where, if you're going to start there. But not a single one of our guests has answered the question of how much. And I think that's where a lot of people typically start if they're going to Google, how much should I have at 30? How much should I have at 60? How much should I have in retirement? And again, we could live to be 70, 100 if we're really lucky. So what amount, what calculator will tell me how much I need?
Oh my gosh. If I had figured out a way to accurately answer that question, I'd be rivaling Jeff Bezos in net worth. It's not the $1 million question. It's literally like the $1 trillion question, because there's so many people struggling with it and nowhere near it. So let me explain first why it's so hard for somebody to give you a straight answer, and then I'll give you some boundaries. And the reason it's so hard to answer the question is that, as you rightly mentioned, we don't know how long you're going to live, any of us. We also don't know at what age you're going to stop working. A lot of people say, I'm never going to stop working. But what I found now that I'm on the other side of 50 is I can't tell you how many people I meet who, for health reasons, literally have to stop working earlier than they wanted to. And when you're younger, you think like, that's not going to happen to me. But I mean, the people I know who it's happened to, they've been really healthy people, good shape, athletic. And then, they come down with cancer, some type of autoimmune issue. So you don't know how long you're going to live. You don't know how long you're going to be able to work. Then you don't know what inflation is going to be between now and then. And then slight upticks in inflation have dramatic impacts on how much money you're going to need. Historically, inflation has run about 3%. We're in a unique period right now. We can talk about that later if you'd like. But at 3% inflation, if you have $100 today, and you fast forward 30 years and you want to have $100 of purchasing power, you're going to have to make sure that money is growing, because at 3% inflation, if your money was just in cash, you'd have about $40 of purchasing power. And if inflation goes up just a little bit to 5% over that 30-year period on average, now you're down to $20 of purchasing power. So we don't know how old we're going to be. We don't know when we're going to have to stop working. We don't know how high inflation is going to be. And then we don't know what returns we're going to generate. We know historically what types of returns, broadly speaking, stocks and bonds, or hard assets like real estate or commodities have generated. But past doesn't predict the future. And then the fifth and probably least talked about is we don't know the order of returns once you start to retire. Order of returns makes all the difference. If you retire into a bull market and your first 5 to 10 years out of retirement, returns are up, you're going to have a completely different experience than somebody who retires into a bear market. So take all those factors, and that's why you don't get a pinpoint number. You tend to get a range. Now, that's all pretty bleak. What are some upsides, if any? One is most retirement calculations assume that your spending stays reasonably constant throughout retirement. I'm divorced now, but when I was married, my ex-husband was 20 years older than me, and a lot of his friends were about 10 years older than him. And so I got a really up close look on a human level of what happens to people's spending as they age. And, the studies show this, and I've seen this with clients, but seeing it in person and watching it, it's very impactful. Spending is higher if you're healthy in the first 10 years of retirement, almost across the board. But then life kind of kicks in, and either you're exhausted because you've done all the things you wanted to do, or your body's like, or you've got grandkids now or great grandkids and you want to spend time with them, and life becomes less expensive with the exception of potentially healthcare costs. So a lot of the models assume a straight line spending, but that's not what happens. So that actually is a little bit of a benefit here. So the best description of how much money do you need that I've ever seen comes from a book by Michael Piper, who is an accountant, a CPA, and it's a little tiny book, less than 100 pages. He self-published, and it's called Can I Retire? And he walks through the impact of these 5 elements that I've just described to help you really understand how difficult it is. Now, given that, how much do you need? So mathematically, what you would do is say, okay, when I retire, how much money do I think I'm going to be spending a year? How much do I think I'm going to be getting from Social Security? And you subtract that. How much money might I be getting from any other additional income sources? You know, a few people may be lucky and have some kind of old style pension plan still going on. Some people may have some annuities. So you subtract that, and what's left is the amount of money that you need to make up in your nest egg. And generally speaking, there's a lot of debate here. But historically, the rule of thumb is you can spend 4% of your nest egg. So you can take whatever number is left and divide it by 0.04. And that would get you to the amount that you need to have saved, in theory, to live 30 years in retirement with exceptionally high odds you're not going to run out of money if you invest in a 60-40 portfolio. So that was a big mouthful. And if you want to break any of that down, we can do that.
Wait, so first of all, the answer was not, you have to use my dad's calculator that I used when I was 11. That's the first problem.
Well, actually, in running all those simulations, I would use that calculator. But the benefit of that calculator is that it enables you to do things like say, well, what if my returns are 6%? What if they're 7%? What if they're 8%? And depending on those returns, how do I back into either what my number is and or how much do I have to save to get there?
So Manisha, I think, there's so much that you said that's so valuable that I really do want to unpack each part of it. But I think something that, is so interesting is everyone just focused on start when you're young, just start doing something, but no one really is thoughtful about it. When you're 20 or 25, like you're just like, I'm putting something in there. I don't know.
It's this like ethereal concept because you can't picture yourself being old and gray.
It is. It's so hard. So
it is.
So can you share a little bit about how, like, are you supposed to come up with what that retirement thing is and then work towards that? Or how can you be more thoughtful about making it a priority in your 20s?
So a couple things. First thing is the reason after focusing on all different age groups and women in different stages, I have really found a passion for helping women in their 20s and early 30s is that if I can get to you at this age, I literally can change your financial life. Second piece to put into to kind of tee this all up and put it into context. If you're in your 20s and 30s now, you are the first generation that statistically speaking will likely spend more years in retirement than you did in the workforce. Because when Social Security first came around, the reason back then it kicked in at age 65 was most people died at 63. So the idea was if you lasted a little bit longer and needed a safety net, the idea was that you were spending a couple years in retirement, not a couple decades. And now it's not even just a couple decades. My dad followed his advice. He retired at age 51 and now he's 83. He literally has been retired as long as he was working. And so what that means statistically is that for every year you are working now, you not only need to fund your living expenses for this current year, you need to set aside enough and invest it wisely enough that it will grow enough to support you for a part or an entire year in the future. So when you stop and think about that, like, holy crud, like each year I'm working, I have to live for this year and set enough aside for the future. So how much is that? The simple math is one that people always want to like poke me in the eye after I say out loud, because it just sounds like I'm saying never eat ice cream again, and or the financial equivalent of that. And it's, if you can set aside 20% of your income into savings starting in your 20s, which is not fun, but if you can do that every year during your working years, it will give you a bit of flexibility if you choose to take time off. Especially important for women who may want to take time off to raise kids or be in a situation of elder care and juggling kids. But at that 20% level, you are on track. Anything less than 10% of savings in your 20s consistently onwards means that you have significantly less wiggle room along the way. And to put that in perspective, if you're like, what is this woman talking about? The average person I meet in their 20s is saving 2, 3, 4%. So most people are dramatically below these numbers. So I'm telling you how to be an Olympian of saving for retirement. And then there's real life. So those are the numbers.
Yeah, I can say from my own personal experience, I'm 30 this year, and I am currently able to max out my 401k and max out my HSA. And I would say all of that in my own head is probably all for retirement investing. But when I first got my first job, the moment that an employer said they're matching 4% or 5%, I was like, perfect, I'll put 5% in. So I'll just match get whatever the match is. And then I'll like go to brunch and enjoy my 20s in New York City like a normal person. And I feel like the balance is very key. You have to at least take advantage of that. Kevin, you have a great example too of how you and your husband have really shift gears to making that a priority. How have you guys done that?
So we talk about this a lot in our sessions that we run with, female finance, collegiate level groups and other professional women's networks events that we present to. But I hit 30 and I was not nearly as put together as Katie. And I was basically worth negative because I still had 40,000 in student loans and thankfully no credit card debt. And thankfully I married a European who had gotten a master's degree with no debt. So at least we could together, just hammer out my student loan debt together. But we paid it off in about 9 months. And then we had just relocated to the US. And so up until that point, the only thing I had was a UK pension. And it's still sitting there, just kind of like neatly tucked away because I can't do anything with it until I'm 55 or whatever. But we aggressively paid off my debt. And then, just maxing out everything we possibly could became the priority. And I would say and that was also spurred by getting pregnant with our first at the time. But I think the last time I checked, Katie, and I don't check all the time. That's another thing that I don't do because I don't like falling victim to like what the market's doing today. But the last time I checked, I think I had like 350,000 just in my, my 401k account, because we've just like, we basically took the mindset, max it all out and work with whatever is left. And for some period of time, that was like eating beans on toast if we had to. And, and as my salary has increased, as my husband's salary has increased, we've kind of balanced that out over time. But for me, it absolutely had to be that case because to your point, Manisha, I didn't have time on my side, aside from that little UK pension, which is basically peanuts in a little can waiting for me. I needed to be super, super aggressive about it. So yeah, I mean, it's just, that was, I played catch up a little bit, but I'm hoping we're, in a good place now. We'll see.
People have heard me speak before, are probably like, okay, does she like does she have any other examples besides this one? But I always come back to sunscreen, that like, if you start using sunscreen in your 20s and 30s, you're really not going to look that much different. You're not going to look any different really than your friends. But by the time you get to be my age, it's pretty clear who used sunscreen and who didn't. And to fix the damage is expensive and painful. And so that's the thing about saving for retirement early on,
by the way.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you don't see it on the surface, but it makes it gives you so much more flexibility. Particularly as a woman, if you can start out fast and furious. And so I really encourage people. I know the common advice is at least contribute to the match, but I always say contribute the max and then live off whatever else is left. And if that means you go to the most amazing brunch, but only one time a month instead of every weekend, there are ways to kind of balance things out. And are your other friends going to be doing the same thing? No, your life will not look like them, but you can still have like mimosas at your house. Tell your friends to bring the champagne. You can go get the orange juice, you know,
you can squeeze it yourself.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are a lot of creative things that you can do if you know, there's like a Buddhist phrase that says boundaries set you free. And what I find is when you have a boundary, you become creative. If you tell yourself like that money goes in right away, and especially if you can do it from your first paycheck, then you'll never have a paycheck with, you know, the extra amount in it. And it can literally change your life. And if you need some additional help, the book that probably had the biggest influence on my life is Vicki Robin and Joe Dominguez's book, Your Money or Your Life. And I've been fortunate enough over the years to have a chance to get to know Vicki a bit, and spent some time doing some speaking with her when the most recent second edition came out in 2018, 2019. And so we got talking about the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early. And to me, the FIRE movement really exemplifies sort of the two extremes. Vicki has said publicly that the extreme end of the FIRE movement was not what she and Joe had intended. It was not about depriving yourself of every possible luxury so that you could retire at 40 and then, you know, figure out what to do from there. Their original intent was much more about living lightly on the planet and making sure that the money you spent was energetically aligned with what makes you happy, your values, you know, the contribution you want to make to community and, you know, Mother Earth. And, you know, there's a spectrum and there's no right or wrong place along that spectrum. But I think by reading Your Money or Your Life, it can really help a lot of people decide how they want to approach enjoying today versus saving in the future. And for whatever saving amount they choose to do in the future, really feeling good about it.
Well, and you can comfortably live on 80% of your salary and make that your comfort level. And then if your salary increases, your lifestyle doesn't necessarily have to increase in tandem. So Catherine, I forget what the ratio is. I think it was like the lower your expenses are, if you maintain those in retirement, then you don't need as much, which is also why it's so hard to come up with a number. But Manisha, you were saying that you've seen it firsthand. People are spending when they retire. And I mean, I can say that I'm a person who is a busybody. When I don't have time, I'm typically spending money to then fill that time. And so I can definitely see a future where the moment that I don't have, you know, something keeping me occupied during the day, I would be like, well, we should go out and go to museums, and I should go travel and see friends. And like, I just
Bottomless
picture,
brunch.
which is just spending in my own head. So are you finding that that is a reality for people, that they can maintain sort of a low cost lifestyle in retirement? Or are you finding that costs, like, you're going to be spending that money?
So it really depends on what's on your list. I retired from the corporate world. I gifted myself retirement when I turned 50. And that lasted about a year. And now I'm back writing a book, and I've joined some boards, and I'm doing some other things. So I don't know if you could really, my dad, mom say I'm the busiest retired person they know. But what I'll say is, I know from having watched my ex-husband and his friends that you really do, between 50 and 65, there's a level of energy that's awesome. And if you don't use it, it starts stair stepping from 65 to 70, 70 to 75, and you just don't have the energy. So if your passions are traveling, and one of the things that I am really excited to do is to learn how to scull. And so I purchased, it's not expensive, but I purchased a little 1930s cottage on a lake in Maine. And I'm going to spend my summers up there sculling. Now, when I'm 70, the odds that I'm going to be spending my summers up there sculling are pretty slim. So I'm doing it now. And so am I going to be buying a summer cabin when I'm in my 70s? Probably not. I'll probably be selling that one and, living off those proceeds. So I find that I actually encourage people early on in retirement to do those things that they want. And not to be morbid, but I have two friends from undergrad, both of whom went on to become doctors. So very knowledgeable about health, phenomenal human beings. And I'm going to try and say this without crying, that they're both dead now. And I mean, freak things, and you literally just don't know. And so it's always a balance. But I encourage people, once they reach that retirement piece, to allow themselves to spend a little more and do those things before they run out of energy. But you're not going to be able to do those if you don't do the work that we're talking about now in your 20s and 30s. And so, going back, Catherine, to something you had said early on, like, well, actually, you and Katie both referenced this, that you can't really see it when you're in your 20s or 30s, what that will look like. And the one thing that I learned from the 12 years that I spent with people significantly older than me is take a look at them. I mean, like, really, when you're in your 20s and 30s, watch what your parents and your grandparents are doing. Like, watch their health and see what's been going on with their energy and their mobility, because that's going to be you one day. And I think that's a message I didn't have in my 20s and 30s. God bless that calculator and being 11 years old.
You had the math. You had the math lesson.
But the visual, I mean, viscerally, if you can watch your family members who are older and see what they're going through, that also can really help you in your 20s and 30s see why you're going to live off 80% if you can, if you want to.
So, Manisha, I mean, okay, I'm now like picturing the future, right? My crystal ball, and I'm also looking, and you mentioned this earlier when you broke down, the key variables that go into your retirement planning. But right now, I feel like if I were retiring, I would feel really anxious about record inflation today. How does that impact your retirement investments, and how much should we worry about it now, right, when we're putting that money away? It's a really weird concept to try to wrap my head around.
Yeah, it is. And the reason we have record inflation is because we have an unprecedented, we have record inflation historically relative to the US. There are other countries that have had multitudes, larger amounts of inflation, but we're having it because an event has happened that like nobody foresaw. And the way I think we protect ourselves from it is through stocks, because conceptually, the way it works is when there's inflation, companies are able to raise prices of goods and services, at least in line with inflation, if not faster, which in theory would help them grow their profits in line with inflation, which would then help the stocks move upward, because a stock is simply an ownership share in an underlying business. And if purchased at a reasonable price, over time, the stock should move up in line with earnings. So what I always say to people is, when you are young, when you are more than 10 years away from being able to access your retirement accounts, honest to goodness, I mean, again, I have to caveat this, I'm not your financial advisor. This is not, to be construed as financial advice, it's financial education. But with my own money, until I'm 10 years away from retirement, I think it mathematically makes sense to have all that money in stocks, because you can't touch it, which means you can weather the up and down. It's not like you're going to be able to spend it when it drops, which would be one of the key mistakes people make, is selling and utilizing money at lows. And then when you get closer to retirement, because we're living longer, so inflation, record or not, will be a continued unknown. Perhaps you keep 10% more in stocks than people would have historically, and you offset that by also in retirement keeping a larger cash buffer. And I want to break this down into two pieces. Right now we have record inflation, and it's really scary. Kind of like the same year, the first year of COVID was really scary. After a while, we're going to adapt and get used to it. And so it feels like a big deal, but the fear of inflation has always been there. It just hadn't manifested itself. The same way the fear of stocks going down is always there, except we didn't really see it in a big way until 2008, 2009, and a smaller way in that first year of COVID. I think it was March that we had right now things aren't going super well. But the trend is really what you want to be focusing on. And right now there aren't structural indications that this inflation should be continuing to increase. It might, but right now there aren't. It's a situationally based COVID rooted type of issue. And so we'll have to see. The second piece of that I've completely forgotten. Of what question I was even answering or where I was going with that.
I think that makes sense though. I think it's, everything sort of catches up with, if one thing shifts, everything moves with it. So if it's inflation, then that people are governments are adjusting their monetary policy. Everything in economics flows in their curve and everything adjusts. So go ahead.
But and I was just saying that you reminded me of what my second point was going to be, which is how else do you deal with inflation? I always talk about stocks as being the gas pedal on your car, and bonds being your brakes. And if I backtrack for a minute, one of the things we often don't talk about is why should you invest in the first place? And the whole reason you invest is what we started off talking about. In inflation, your goal is to make your money grow at least as fast as inflation. And ideally faster than inflation, which is what grows your purchasing power. And so what I feel is lacking in discussion, especially as people move towards retirement, but at any age, it's a good tactic, is really making sure that you have enough of a cash buffer that you don't ever have to sell stocks in a down market. Because that's the only time that market volatility will, cut your feet out from under you. When I hear people say that 2008, 2009 ruined their retirement, I know that one of two things happened. They either sold at the bottom because they got scared, which is understandable, or two, they did not have a sufficient cash buffer and they were forced to sell at the bottom to meet cash obligations. So I think if we have sustained higher inflation, which could then also be indicative of a more uncertain environment, therefore a more uncertain stock environment, one antidote to that is making sure that you keep a healthy buffer in cash. And people be like, well, that's crazy. But if you think about it, interest rates on money market funds and so forth pretty much are about half the rate of inflation. And that's why people have been complaining about them for so long, because inflation's been low. So those interest rates have been low. So you keep your money, and yeah, you're losing a little bit relative to interest, but you're not keeping a ton of money, but you're keeping enough money that you don't have to sell. And not having to sell means you can put more of your money, more of the money you're investing in stocks versus bonds. And then that's the piece that enables you to protect yourself from aggressive inflation, if that makes sense.
Definitely. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's great to look at it from that sort of big picture lens too, of why are we doing this in the first place, and sort of think of it like that. I think also inflation tends to be one of those things, like you said, Catherine, an ethereal concept that people are like, I don't know. Right. I don't know.
I think it was like Mr. Money Mustache who was talking about how anything you spend, he talks about how life is a series of $10 mistakes or something, right? And how really you should be looking at something saying, is that worth $100? Because that's what it's going to cost me by a missed opportunity of not investing something in the, today. So it's such a hard concept to wrap your head around.
No, it really is. And that's why one of the reasons I am such a fan of keeping investments super simple. At the present moment, I have no debt. I own my real estate. I'm not a real estate mogul. I have a lovely condo here in Portland, and I have a little place on a lake in Maine, and it's little, and I own those both outright, and all the rest of my money is in Vanguard target date retirement funds, with the exception of one chunk of money. My brother is an active portfolio manager. I believe in indexing. I started off on the active side. I left, he stayed, and I love him. And he's actually done really well, but that's just, I think, because he's amazing. And so I have one.
We'll make sure he hears this part.
We won't cut that.
and that's his. But all the rest of my money is in Vanguard target date retirement funds. And basically, because I have, quote, retired so early, I have staggered them out. And so I have them staggered out in 5 year increments out as far as they're available right now. And so I don't worry about inflation, knowing that if it's really bad, I'm covered. And if it's really benign, well, great, I'm going to do even better.
Right. And no, wait, I now have another question for you. Your former husband's friends, what were they spending their money on?
I mean, not unrealistic things. I mean, a lot of them were hard charging professionals, lawyers, doctors, financial executives, people who own their own small businesses and really never had the time to travel. So a lot of it was travel, seeing the world. I would say that would be the biggest expense. Other things that I would see, and again, this was an elite, I will say an elite group. But I think at any income level, I'm seeing outsized travel. Maybe it's not internationally, but maybe it's travel to see the national parks that you've never had a chance to see in your life. I also see a lot more family activities, a lot more trips to see grandkids, a lot more money spent on getting the family together, doing things with the family, and then hobbies. I mean, Ooh, people pick up all kinds of hobbies.
Ooh, golf is
And,
pricey. Golf is
well,
very expensive.
it is. And I mean, I saw people picking up off-road motorcycling, like that. Yeah, I mean, all
Oh,
kinds of interesting
that's
things.
really
Catherine,
fancy
we're talking
equipment.
about YOLO retirement.
I
right
know,
now.
right?
And so, and so that's what it's not like I'm seeing people like run off buying, head to toe Gucci outfits.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's the kinds of things: traveling, learning languages, volunteering, taking up a hobby, spending time with family. Oftentimes I see charitable giving going up as well. And so not unreasonable.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not like you said they all bought a yacht and
Right.
then the yacht
Right.
sunk. Like, I
well,
think
that's why I asked the question, because I kind of knew it was going to be that, but I wanted to hear it because I think, okay, as much as we can't picture being old and gray or, what inflation is going to be, you definitely can picture that when you're 55 or 60, you're going to want to hop on take a cruise with your spouse or your partner, or like go to California because your kids are living there, or to your point, hike something, or, check out the Grand Canyon. None of these things are that, again, you're not a Kim Kardashian character,
Right.
spraying champagne off of a boat or whatever.
Right.
These aren't complex concepts, but
they
will
cost
cost money. Yep.
And Manisha, I think that that's also something, going back to your piece of, you are putting all this money away to have those things for this retirement that you really want to have because you're making it a priority. But then it might come down to, you might not know when that retirement is coming. So I have seen, I've seen a lot of different sides. I've seen, my fiance's father choose to retire when he wanted. I've seen his mom be told she's retiring. I've also seen, family friends pretty much get injured or some sort of health issue where they also had no choice in the matter. And obviously, depending on whether you were ready or not, is kind of no longer relevant. And I've, played with the compound interest or compounding calculators to see, okay, what is the difference in 5 years if I retire at 60 instead of 65 or 55 instead of 60? Like, that's a actual huge chunk of money.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, oh, 5 years, like, what's that? But like, that is huge at that point in your life. And I just can't imagine being, on track saying, all right, 60, I'm going to retire early at 60. Here we go. And then at 55, I'm told I'm fired. And now I miss out on that huge chunk of money. I mean, clearly I can always go back to work somewhere else or do something else to make money.
But I mean, I'm telling
Fingers
you,
crossed, but if you can't, what do you do? Like, I don't know.
So, I mean, it is a real issue. And even in today where, anywhere you go, you see signs, if you're at the grocery store, if you're at the drugstore, you go to any big box retailer and they're like, help needed. And,
and they're paying really well, by the way.
I'm like,
seriously,
$18 an hour, $20 an
Honestly,
hour.
at some point, I might consider just quitting my professional services job because at least I'll get paid by the hour.
No, it's true.
It's a different issue.
What I tell people is when you get to that point, if you don't have a choice, the difference is staggering. The money that you compound at the very end, and the way to think about it, it's like a snowball. Like you start with a little pack of snow and you're rolling and you're rolling and you're rolling. But when does the snowball get really big?
I want to know when I'm seeing the snowman. Like, I obviously, if I miss the carrot or like the buttons, that's one thing. But like, when am I going to start seeing it?
And the snowman gets bigger the earlier you start, but it's those last rolls that really make a difference. And if life keeps you from making those last rolls, what can help? The biggest thing that can make up for it is if you had started in your 20s and 30s. If you start in your 20s and 30s, then if stuff hits the fan in your 50s, you can weather it. But if you don't start early, now you're in a position where, I help a lot of women in my age group who are suffering from exactly, like they left the workforce to take care of elderly parents. Oftentimes they could handle the kids, but when the elderly parents came in, it was just like too much. And, now they're in their mid 50s and there's ageism. There just is. So what I tell them is the power of cutting back a little with being creative on where you can get income sources from is actually remarkably powerful. It's not as powerful as that last circle on the snowball, but it really can make a difference. And so it's not that all is lost, but it's, it takes it takes more effort to do that in your 50s than it would have in your 20s and 30s to just buckle down and save. And so that's the message that I really want to get across. That the pain now, it's
I'm receiving it
so much smaller than if you wait
showering
till
in it. Here we go. No, it's I think what you just said is so important because we just spent so much time talking about there's so much that we can't control.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe one of my mantras is just, I can't control other people. That's my thing. And in this situation, it sounds like I can't control a lot of situations in this retirement world. The one thing I can control is what I can put away right now. And that is the only thing that I can control. So that there's power in that.
There really is. And, focusing on my friend Carl Richards, if people don't know of him, he's fantastic. He's at Behavior. His website is behaviorgap.com. Definitely sign up for his newsletter. He's been a columnist at the New York Times for 10 years now. His fundamental concept is that if any investment precept worth paying attention to should be able to be stated simply enough to be demonstrated with a Sharpie on a cocktail napkin. And his iconic drawing is a Venn diagram of two circles. And one says what's important and the other says what you can control. And we've discussed a lot of important topics, but the vast majority of them we can't control. The only one we can control right now is how much do we save, and how do we choose to invest those savings. And so that's the best return on investment in terms of where to focus your time. Figure out how to save as close to 20% as you can. And I think it's still up on the New York Times website, a calculator called the Save 1% More calculator. So if you're saving 3% right now, don't beat yourself up. Go to the calculator and see what happens if each year you increase your savings by 1% or 2%. The power of compounding helps beyond words. So again, the goal is to get to 20%. But if you're in low single digits, just keep adding a single digit each year.
I love that. And I think that's such a positive note to finish our formal part of our conversation with you. Manisha, we do love to ask our guests one fun question before we release you back out into the wild of saving women and their finances. And this one has taken a slight shift during COVID because people's responses have definitely been affected by COVID, but we'll have at it and see. The question is, what's one thing you always like to skimp on, and what's one thing you always like to splurge on?
Oh, okay. Splurge is actually, I can answer both of those well. So I quote skimp on getting my hair colored. I'm completely gray now. And if I don't get my hair colored every 3 weeks, I look like a skunk. And so I tried doing the L'Oreal because I'm worth it, $10 hair color, but I did way more than $10 worth of damage to my bathroom with spots. The salon stuff is so expensive. So I found a beauty school nearby, and I let the students color my hair because I don't do highlights. It's, it's one color.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
So I skimp there, and I have saved so much money on hair color. And the thing I never skimp on is time in coffee houses. So I will buy those $5 lattes all day long because I usually spend like 2 or 3 hours there reading a book or writing or working on a project.
It's actually quite cheap if you think about it. It's an easy way to entertain yourself. And I think, honestly, you should write a book about that because there's a lot of shame out there about the latte factor, like interfering with your ability to retire, and you're living it, right?
Yeah.
Like retired sipping $5 lattes.
Yeah. The next book can be the $5 latte retirement plan.
Yes,
that's what I want to
there
sign
you
up
go.
for. I want to have enough in my retirement that I can get a $5 latte every day.
Yeah. My kids don't need to go to college. It's totally fine.
Yeah, whatever. We're not going to college in the future. It's fine.
No, well, honestly, so I will tell you, and we say this, Katie hears me say this a lot. Anytime we're talking about the future, my greatest goal is just to not be a burden on my children when I'm older. And you talked about this, Manisha, when you were saying, people who kind of that sandwich generation that are raising their own children and they're, helping their aging parents. And, I don't necessarily feel this need to leave, the wing of a building at my, alma mater or, some amazing donation or a super yacht for my kids. But if I can give them the gift of not having to worry about, how is mom going to eat or whatever, then I feel like that's success. And if that does mean in the short term, I can't pay for college or like can't front all of that money, I think that's okay. And I say that a lot because I feel like the minute in your like when you hit 30 and you're starting a family or whatever, you feel this pressure of like, I have to now provide for this child, which is going to cost me about $200,000 just by the time they make it to age 18, never mind college, which will be crazy amounts of money if we keep going at this rate. So I think it's good to look at what you want retirement to look like and to also choose categories that don't have to happen, right? Or that are nice to have.
Catherine, I think your thinking is spot on. It's trailblazing thinking. And I think it's the thinking that in order to have financial peace of mind for yourself and your kids, people are going to have to start thinking the way you are about college. That's not the gift. The gift is not being a burden, because the years you will be a burden on your kids if college saps all of those resources will be right in their prime working years where they're trying to build their safety net. So it is, I think it's the biggest gift you can give kids. And it's a very controversial thing to say.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just going to keep going until someone shoots it down. And then, I'll still say it.
It'll only be like a 17-year-old kid that cares. So whatever.
Well, I'm also, yes. Go ahead, Katie.
Oh no, I was just going to say, Manisha, thank you so much. I really did love this conversation, and your books really have been so helpful as well. So we're looking forward to sharing this with our audience.
Oh, well, I can't thank you enough. You guys are doing such a good service in such a fun way to be getting the message out. So I was tickled pink to get to come on this